Thank you everyone for joining us for our weekly Vermont vegetable and berry growers webinar. Very excited today to have Kevin O'Dwyer from Langwater Farm in Easton, right? Massachusetts,
Correct.
joining us, and David Marchant from Riverberry Farm here in Vermont. So I'm going to hand it over to Kevin. Some of you may have heard him at our Vermont Veg and Berry Growers winter meeting or at the New England vegetable meeting, and he's got a lot to share. So I will get you started here, Kevin. Thank you so much for joining.
Oh, well, thanks for inviting me, Becky, and happy to share with everybody. So I'll just start with a little overview about our farm, give you a sense of our operation. We're a first generation farm. This is our 16th year in production on a busy roadside here in the suburbs of Boston. We're about 30 minutes south of Boston and 30 minutes from the coast. So a little bit more temperate than you guys. And Becky, if we roll to my next slide, we can give folks a sense of where exactly we are here. So right on the cusp of zone 6B and 7A, halfway between Boston and Providence. And as I said, we're on a fairly busy road, so retail has been the best option for us. Although when we started, we sort of had a better split, a better balance between wholesale and retail and CSA. But as we've gotten our name out there and built our brand, the retail has started to greatly surpass the wholesale operation. 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now, we finished construction on a much bigger retail store. We finished this building here, which gives us about 3,000 square feet of retail space, which is significantly up from the 300 feet of retail space that we started in initially and operated out of for the first 12 years. And you can see a couple of drone shots of our farm. We have 3 farms. The strawberry production happens all on our home farm, because there's a pick your own component of it, and so we are trying to draw people here to the home farm so that we can get them on a hayride out to the berry patch and then back to the store and hopefully sell them a sandwich for lunch or some other veggies. So there's a couple of shots of our fields here at the home farm. That field there, the most recent one there, is the busy road there. It's a state highway, 2-lane state highway, Route 138. Runs from Boston down to the southern coast here, and we get great traffic on that road. So our stand is right on this road here, and we call this field along the road our billboard, and really try to have a good mix of crops in there. Always try to have some strawberries there, so it's easy walking distance, so we can offer 2 pick your own fields, a walkout field, and then on weekends or busier days, we offer hay rides out to the pick your own patch. Our split, mostly retail, as I said, and about good chunk of PYO, and that's growing every year as we can get more people to come to the farm and pick their own, and the wholesale is shrinking every year too. So now we're down to just about 5% of the berry crop gets wholesaled. So a little bit of about our planting system and our production system. So we're using plugs that we've been sourcing from Cube Pack, and hoping to diversify that system soon and produce our own plugs from tips. The plugs, we found our best planting date is August 15th, and that gives us the best balance of good growth, good crown growth, while minimizing the number of passes we have to make for runners. So the plugs are planted on plastic beds, right with the water wheel. It takes a couple days to get the 2 acres or so that we plant in. And then we're doing a couple of hand weeding passes and runner passes throughout September. Usually about 3 weeks to 4 weeks after planting is when we're first getting in there to make that initial pass of weeding and cutting runners. And then we're doing it again in late September. And sometimes we have to get in there depending on how bad the chickweed pressure is or other winter annual pressure is to do a final pass before we apply a row cover. So we're putting that row cover on in October, really just to get a few extra growing days out of the season and push that crown size. And then we're removing the covers, leaving enough time for the plants to acclimate before we mulch them. So we don't want to pull the cover off, having pushed the plant and be actively growing, and then cover it immediately with straw. So typically around mid-November is right for us. And that timing has changed. When I was growing up working on a strawberry farm almost 30 years ago, I remember we were mulching every year by Thanksgiving, and usually Thanksgiving was wrapping up. Now, 30 years later, climate change and growing on plastic beds, I'm seeing the plants growing more actively into beginning of December, not really starting to go into dormancy till then. So we've pushed back that mulching date into December, and we're sourcing a nice green cut rye straw. It has little to no weed seed in it. Then we get going in the following year. We have this little phenological sign that I like to alert me to when the best time to take the straw is. And when I hear the peepers in the wetlands and the low-lying areas start going at it, typically that's the end of March, beginning of April. And we hear that, and we check on the berries and look for a good forecast. Make sure that we're not going to remove the straw and see a night in the teens or low 20s right after that. But we get in there and rake the straw, and pretty aggressively try to clean that plastic off. However, there's always some remaining leaves, some detritus on the beds, and so I found it very helpful to let those beds dry out for a few days, even a week, and then maybe make another pass with rakes or a backpack blower and blast any of those dead leaves off and really try to clean the bed, primarily to reduce the inoculum load of botrytis on the bed there, and hopefully reduce the pressure. So that's worked well for us in the past few years, that second pass. And then we get our mega net set up for frost protection, which we've relied on heavily the past couple of years. We've had several nights where we're down in the high 20s, and those worked well for us. It was 2 years ago. I think it was May 18th. We had that really late freeze. I'm sure you guys got it even worse than us, but we got down to 26 that night with a field full of flowers, and those mega nets saved our butt that night. We had little to no loss coming off that really cold night. So we get the sprinkler set up, and then we're starting to implement a spray schedule. And I should note that the first sprays are typically done with oxidate right after the straw is removed, really to try to clean that bed and start with as little disease inoculum on the bed as possible. We get going in early June with harvest. Sometimes it's the last couple of days of May, and then we use those meganet sprinklers again during the fruiting period. A few afternoons during the season when the temperatures are getting up into the mid-high 80s or 90s, we'll turn them on around like 1 or 2 o'clock and give them a couple hours of sprinkling, and then try to make sure that we've shut them off with enough time for the leaves to dry out before the night. So then as far as our fertility, nothing too complex here, and it's primarily a pre-plant field prep application. Putting it underneath the plastic bed, but we always like to compost the strawberries, spread compost prior to the bed prep, and we're aiming to get about 150 yards per acre on there of a finished compost that we're making here at the farm. Then we go in there with some fertilizer. We're using primarily Crayer's 822. And the reason we use the 822 is to try to minimize the phosphorus application there. Our soils are generally high in phosphorus, so we are trying not to apply too much additional phosphorus. So we're trying to get about 30 to 35 pounds of nitrogen down under that bed to get the plants off to the races for the late summer and early fall. And then we're usually adding somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 150 pounds of sulfate of potash. That depends on the field that we're in and the soil, what the soil tests are telling us. And then supplemental nutrition is added in season. We've done some leaf tests, but I should really be in the habit of doing more regular leaf testing. But oftentimes I'm just relying on visual cues for deficiencies and adding a little supplemental nitrogen in late May or maybe a little bit in June, but very carefully. And often it's potassium. So we've found these fertilizers through Brookdale the last 3 or 4 years work pretty well in the drip, stay in solution. They are expensive. The Enviro 5020 and the Enviro K we've been using. So that seems to have worked well for us, but really best practices would be to be getting regular leaf tissue analysis to see exactly what we need. And then a little bit about our spray program. So we're using biopesticides to try to give ourselves any advantage that we can get. And as I mentioned, oxidate is an important tool in there for really sort of starting with a clean slate and trying to ensure that we don't have any extra inoculum there in the bed and the leaf canopy. And so the biopesticides really they're tricky to use. Your spray tank water is important. If your pH is too acidic, if you're using things like howler or double nickel, that can be an issue. And also with municipal water, if chlorine rates are too high. So it is important to know what your water source is like, to make sure that you're not just putting in biopesticides and killing them in your spray tank. So I use a boom sprayer, offset produce sprayer from IVA Manufacturing. It's pretty reasonable value, and we have 30-inch drops on that with the nozzles that are pointed up a little bit, and so we're able to get really low. You can kind of see in that picture, but I'm trying to get down those drops down in between the row and then point them back up so I can really get underneath that leaf canopy. And that's a shot at night. Especially with these biopesticides, sunlight is also detrimental. So I'm trying to spray these at night, but also they're not going to be very active on a cold stretch. So once I get into using howler, I'm looking for mild nights above 50 degrees to make my applications, and then doing them right, usually shortly after sunset, 9 p.m. to midnight or so on these mild nights. And let's see, my next slide has a list of some of the materials that we use, but primarily I'm relying on oxidate at the beginning of the season before bloom, and really trying to sterilize that bed. And then we rely very much on howler once we start to flower. So I'm making weekly applications of howler, and less so using the copper formulations, but those are available if we see any bacterial foliar diseases. So the howler is used probably about 5 or 6 times through the flowering and into the fruiting period. And then once we get into the heavy harvest period, we've also found in the last couple of years this Sil Matrix product to be helpful. And so Sil Matrix is a silica-based product, and the idea is that it forms a little armor around the berry that will protect against spores being able to land and get a foothold on the fruit. So, not sure how effective that is, but it has seemed to hold off botrytis and anthracnose a little bit the last couple of years. And it's also labeled for mites and aphids as well. Typically, I'm not making any or many insecticide applications, since I'm treating them as an annual and rotating, keeping not coming back to a piece for at least 5 or 6 years. I haven't had much pest pressure. We are scouting for tarnished plant bug through the bloom, and on occasion, some years I have had to make applications of like a pyganic or an entrust to try to target tarnished plant bug as the bloom is finishing and as we're starting to fruit, if I've seen a buildup of nymphs in the field. And so, yeah, I touched on this a little bit, but this is generally our spray schedule. So a couple, 2 or 3 applications of oxidate in April after the plants have been uncovered. And then the first sign of bloom, which is typically around the first week of May for us, we're switching over and starting to rely more on howler and spraying that weekly throughout May, and a couple applications into June during fruiting. And then we're also then incorporating the Sil Matrix during the fruiting before rain events. And then I like to go back out there with oxidate after any heavy rains or any extended periods of leaf wetness just again to try to clean up anything and knock down anything that may be getting started out there. And here's a little cost analysis of some of the fungicides that we're using. So you can see the howler is fairly reasonable. You know, if we're applying it in the middle of that rate at 5 pounds per acre, but every time I go out, there's about $50 in the tank. And so if I've made 6 applications to an acre, then I've got about $300 into that acre, which seems pretty reasonable to me. And some of the other materials there, I think Cueva is probably the most expensive, but not heavily relied on in our strawberry program. That typically we're using more in the tomatoes, onions, and some of the other veggies. So that's about it for our plan there and how we're producing it. I'm happy to take questions after David goes, or whenever.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Makes me want to eat strawberries right now, looking at those pictures. Seem a long way off. You do have one question, if you don't mind answering it before David goes, is what are your typical yields per acre?
Typical yields per acre, that's a good question. You know, I think about it in quarts, but we over 10,000 pounds per acre, I'm sure, but I don't have a great number for that. I wish I did, but I'm usually, you know, mixing pints and quarts throughout the season, you know, depending on conditions. Where in CSA demands, we're picking into pints some days when we need to stretch the number of containers out into quarts, but I don't have a great answer for that. Sorry, Vern.
Well, he'll ask you again next year.
I know, and I'll need to get one ready. And I do have the information there through our point of sales, but I just didn't. I should have pulled it for the presentation, but I didn't.
No, that was awesome. Hopefully you can hang on and be around for the
Absolutely.
last part of the webinar. Have a few more questions, but I'm going to hand it over to David. Thank you, David. We always pick on you to share about strawberries because you know everything in Vermont, at least. So thanks.
Okay. My name's David Marchant, Riverberry Farm. We started growing strawberries 33 years ago. Why did we grow strawberries? I had worked for UMass Strawberry IPM program in the 80s. And when we bought this farm, it was kind of the boonies. And I did know people will come out for berries. And that's how we got our name and our farm, even though it's only now less than probably 5% of what we do. So we're pretty old school, even though we tried a lot of stuff about 20 years ago with plasticulture. We have kind of stayed with matted row for the last, well, ever since we started. We've changed a little bit in terms of going with a single row planting to kind of a double wide on a bed, because we do about 50, 60 acres of wholesale vegetables and everything's set up on that bed spacing. So we set it up as that. It's, you know, not the best in terms of probably yield potential because we don't have as much row edge, you know, which is where you can increase your yields. But for us, the most important thing is making a nice picking experience. We find people pick a whole lot more if it's set up well, easy to pick. And so if my yields are less, that's fine with me. In terms of how we sell our product, it's really about 90% pick your own, and we fruit about 1.5 acres each year, and about 10% wholesale. So not very much wholesale. We plant a double row. We fruit like 1 to 2 years. We were originally conventional. I didn't really use herbicides, but we were using things like malathion to take care of tarnished plant bug and some fungicides, a little bit of grass selective herbicides, but we converted to organic probably 20 years ago, I'm guessing. And they all kind of run together. I can't remember exactly, but so at this point, if we have clean fields this year, we're going to be fruiting probably maybe 1/2 acre for the second year. because we were able to keep it very clean. It's really weeds become the biggest issue. So, but in general, we look at it as a 1-year crop. So we plant in late April, early May, and you deal with weeds, and then we head on into fruiting the next year. So we always have about 3 acres of berries, one planting that's in its first year and the second fruiting. And then as soon as we're done, we just till it in unless it looks really clean. So we don't really do much renovation. Yeah, so why did we go to 2 rows? We started sometimes having trouble with gaps. And if you're planting a single row, with pick your own, if you got 10 feet with no berries, it becomes spotty. And we converted to planting 2 rows approximately 12 to 18 inches apart, and then it turns into one wide matted row. But if I have a few plants that don't make it, I've still got a little bit more density. All right, so this is our double row planting. You can see we have quite a bit of space. So this would be, the first year planting, and we have gone to actually using a very little Kubota mini tractor with a little rototiller behind it in between the rows so we can get down, which has kind of made things quite easy. In terms of weed control, we tine weed the crowns a number of times. Sometimes we can go in with a finger weeder, but we find the tine weeder works so well. We keep doing it as long as we can until we are then into kind of hand hoeing at that point. And we don't really do any runner removal at all. We do the typical matted row, and we just found for our system and our amount of management level that we do, it works the best. All right, so how do we get ready for planting? Becky wanted me to work on establishment and stuff. So we always spend a year cover cropping it. The cover crop could be a rye vetch plow down, or if we, like this year, we prepped where we're going to plant this coming year. We prepped it with, we had a beautiful oat field pea. We turned that in July. Then we planted a caliente mustard, and then we came back with oats and field peas. It's really nice. We get a nice cover, and then it's dead over winter, and it's quite easy to prep the beds and do that. Varieties, you can see we use the old PAL transplanter, bare root crowns. Our favorite varieties are Cavendish, Jewel, Cabot. Playing with Flavor Fest, it looks pretty nice. Wendy, we came back into, we've tried Galetta, we've tried, what other ones have we tried that are kind of okay? Galetta, we kind of got out of. Wendy, we had a great crop with last year. AC Valley Sunset's a nice late bearing, but really the Cavendish, Jewel, and Cabot have been kind of our mainstays over the years. And you can see here where we tine weed. You can see to the left there, we got quite a bit of, oat stubble, fair bit of organic matter. We do have one of these Eco Reggie weeders, but we don't use it. It's just easier to tine weed. I think if we did a single row, maybe we'd go back to the Reggie weeder, but the double row has worked pretty well for us. And then we're out there hoeing. Not probably more than we'd like to be, but I think doing a really good year of cover cropping has really kind of made it a much better system for us. And this is our first year with a caliente mustard that Becky suggested, recommended, and I know Gray's Berry Farm uses a lot of it. So I'm anxious to see how that does. Our last 2 years, we went on to virgin ground, and it was unbelievable, the difference. We typically have at least a 3-4 year rotation out of strawberries. And this year we'll be planting into ground that was in berries, I believe 5 or 6 years ago. So it'll be interesting to see. All right, so this is our overhead irrigation. We typically use aluminum solid set. We have been doing it. We spend 2 years ago. You were at what, 26, Kevin? We were at, I think, maybe 16. It is pretty impressive how well we can protect blossoms. We really didn't lose any blossoms, even in that incredible freeze. But last year was probably the best year we've had in a long time, and I didn't have to frost protect once, which was heavenly, because you're out there at midnight, 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you get the irrigation going, you usually don't sleep too well. But it is, I must admit, some of the nicest times I've seen on the farm is at about 2 in the morning and kind of poking my head around the sprinklers. It's pretty amazing. So, so anyways, you can see here our straw, wide rows, a lot of space for pickers. You know, the matted rows a little wider than I would, you know, if I was listening to yield totals, it'd probably be nice to have narrower rows and everything. But like I say, we're really oriented towards the pick your own, and the system is working pretty well for us. We do not bury drip tape. We probably should. You know, I guess after 33 years, it seems to be working. It would be nice to do it, but then when we go in, it's something else to have to pull out before we start ripping the field up. So I know Full Belly Farm has a nice attachment on their pile, so it lays the drip right down, and we consider it, but we did do some work with the biodegradable mulch, and then we did use drip tape with that, and that's actually a really good way to establish a matted row. Okay, next slide. Okay, so one thing we've been playing with is oats between our berries. The year of planting, we plant in September. It just really has worked terrifically the last 2 years. Again, it's my little Kubota tractor pulling a tiny Gandy seeder behind it, and it then just it increases the amount of mulch there, and it makes the pathways fabulous. It also gets up pretty high. It gives a little bit of wind protection, I believe, in the fall as well. And I guess next one. Okay, we mulch with straw. We grow our own straw rye that we cut in early June typically, and we will you know, put up 600-700 bales, and then we put it on with a wick mulcher. You can see there the 3-point hitch on our mutter tractor, and works pretty well for laying the mulch on. Yeah, so there's a nicely mulched field. You can see the oats there holding the ground. I don't have any bare ground, which is nice. And that's something we will continue to do. You know, next spring, you hopefully looking for a great establishment, nice kind of stand there, not overly crowded plant-wise. In this picture, you can see one of our most problem diseases is leaf spot. We're in a river valley. So we get a lot of fog in the fall, and I should be spraying religiously in the fall, and sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. I'm either too busy with all our fall storage crops. We do a lot of acres of carrots and cabbage, and sometimes I'm too tired to get out there with the sprayer, but it would behoove us, I know. We are always looking for varieties that are more resistant to leaf spot. Jewel is not that resistant. Cavendish is definitely much more. But that's one of the major diseases we deal with. Botrytis is sometimes an issue for us. We've had pretty good luck with the Botristop product. And then we also, we do use some oxidate in the spring for leaf spot. And I was just at a growers conference over in New York State yesterday on brassicas, and the Cornell extension agent, they were doing a lot with alternaria with the ozo herb fungicide, and she's she mentioned that it actually seems to be quite effective on botrytis and strawberries. So it might be something I'd look at in the future. Yeah, so for us, matted row works. Pick your own works for us. When I look at how our farm labor management works, for us, cutting runners and doing that, I know a lot of people have a lot of good luck with that, planting bare root crowns into plastic. We've played with it, but I've kind of stuck with the matted row. It's easier for us to send somebody through with a tiller, kind of, or sweeping our runners in and then getting out there, as opposed to getting out there and cutting runners by hand. And really, with our climate, when we used to do plug planting, we did it with Chandler, and I know there's been some improved varieties, but we didn't get the production. We did it for 2 or 3 years that we see with our matted row. Oh, there's a few. Okay. Yeah, there's a few other things I'd mentioned. Like I said, we did crowns into plastic, where we would, punch the holes with the water wheel, and then hand plant the crowns. This was us doing plug planting, and it's pretty neat. We just found that we didn't get the yields. So pick your own people were a little frustrated because they'd have to walk around a lot more. They just couldn't sit down and pick a flat. And so it would be I think if it would be a good way to perhaps, bring a little earlier fruit, but we just didn't feel like it was quite worth it. And then we're dealing with trying to pull up strawberry plastic or deciding what to do with it. The BioTele system was, we got a SARE grant, what year is it? 2006. So we were 20 years ago almost. And we were planting crowns into the biodegradable mulch, and it really worked quite well for establishing a matted row system, because it was starting to break down once the runners were running, but it really reduced the amount of weed control. I would probably go back to it if it was allowed in organic production, but we aren't allowed to use it. So at this point, I'm doing what we're doing, but I was surprised how well it worked. And that is part of the reason why we got into this double planted row system and a little bit wider matted row. It was nice thing about it is you could treat it like a matted row, but you got the benefits of the reduced weeding with the BioTele mulch, and it broke down early enough that most of the runners were able to set. So we had a nice, good density in terms of a matted row. So anyways, things that we will continue to do, oats planting between the rows, producing our own straw is huge. I think we reduced our labor greatly by not having to deal with, when you could use a grass selective herbicide, it doesn't matter to you too much if the mulch has a lot of oat or barley or wheat or rye seed in it. But I remember buying straw out of Canada, and it would just be loaded. I mean, they don't really seem to care too much. I did have an older farmer who would help us combine when we first got started, and he was incredibly careful and made sure we got everything out of it as much as we could, and that straw was fabulous. But whenever we bought it in, it was really a mess. So we've gone to mowing it when it's headed out, and that's worked well. Day neutrals for fall fruit. I know a lot of people around us are doing really well with that, with the tunnels. We've grown some just to have some at the stand. We haven't gone very much into it, but that is pretty much, I think, all the slides. In terms of pest management, Kevin went over our biggest is tarnished plant bug. We use Pyganic, and we use a Bovaria product, depending on, Bovaria will actually work quite well. And as long as there's enough it's a moist year, but Pyganic does help quite a bit. And we'll usually tank mix those two. I'm looking at spraying Pyganic 3 or 4 times, a couple applications of Bovaria. And one thing that we have found, while I use a boom sprayer early on for some of the fungicides, I actually have a gun on our sprayer. And the biggest problem is once you get a wide matted row is getting contact on that flowers. Because if they're underneath, Cabot's, flowers sit up kind of nice and high, but many varieties, they're down underneath the leaf canopy. And our small acreage, I'm able to buzz up and down with the gun, and it really penetrates. And we've done pretty well with the tarnished plant bug. That is pretty much it, I think, Becky.
Great. Thank you so much, David.
Yep.
It's pretty beautiful. Pick your own scene up there. So there are a couple questions already. If people have others, feel free to unmute or put something in the chat. But Nate is asking for both of you, what do you budget or figure for labor needs per acre or per row to stay on top of everything? So just a question about labor managing these systems.
For us, there's our biggest labor component would probably be hoeing from kind of July, August, September. We're good with a tine weeder. I'd have to go into my number of hours we spend on berries for labor, but that component is probably the most. Planting is very little time. Tine weeding is very little time. We don't do much retail picking. I usually hire high school kids and pay them by the quart for that. I know last year we had a very good yield. We yielded, about 12,000 quarts to the acre. So we did quite well. When I look at, we often analyze our crops with a ratio of labor to dollar, like how many, and what that ratio is tells us how profitable it is, because labor is always usually the biggest thing. So we were, I think we were at about 5 to 1 last year, which was decent. But I would need to do a little more research into those dollars. I don't know if Kevin's got his numbers right there, but
I did a little. I saw Nate's question, and I did a little back of the envelope math here, and our biggest cost as well is weed control and runner removal. So we do them all in one pass there, and so for each pass we make per acre, we've got about 50 person hours into that. So if we're making 3 passes, which is not uncommon over the late summer and fall, into weeding and runner removal, we got 150 hours just in that. And the planting labor, typically we're able to plant an acre with 3 people on the water wheel in just under 2 days. So I figure about we'll say about 45 hours for per acre there. And then at the end of the year, 30 hours to remove the plastic and the drip tape. So a little over 200 hours per acre for the field prep, planting, runner removal, weeding, and plastic removal at the end of the year. The labor number to pick is the biggest one. And I know, David, you're doing mostly pick your own, but we spend a fair amount of time picking the berries. About 6 to 10 people every day for 2 or 3 weeks out there. And they're out there for 5 to 6 hours in the morning. Only before lunch we pick. So that definitely is the biggest cost for us, the harvest labor.
There's a kind of a follow-up question too about what you pay your pickers per quart.
Oh yeah, and by the piece, that would be interesting. We've yet to introduce that idea to the pickers, but For us, we haven't had great luck with with the suburban youth around here being productive. So we're mostly paying adults to pick, and probably the lowest earner is $18 an hour. So somewhere between 18 and 22 are where the laborers land.
We pay usually about $2 a quart to pick. $1.75 to $2 a quart.
I would say in good picking, and ideally we're keeping them in really good picking most of the year. That one of our good pickers should be able to do 2 8-quart shippers, so 16 quarts in an hour pretty easily.
Yeah, I mean, I would say some of the diligent workers could make $25 an hour, but typically they're not that diligent. So
Vern is also asking, I hope you have your records ready. What prices you're getting retail?
So we're at $10.50 a quart retail, and I believe we are at $7.50 or $8. Actually, I think we went to $8 on a pint this year.
we got $9 a quart this year, pre-picked, and we don't sell that much. I mean, we're kind of off a main road and nothing like where Kevin is. So, but yeah, we were at $9 a quart this past year.
Great.
So pick your own people at $4 a pound. So that, I mean, it ends up paying. They're probably paying $5 to $5.50 a quart to pick it themselves. It's £1.25. So.
This is Charlie Gray here.
Yeah.
I got a question for both of you. How many plants are you planting per acre, and what nurseries are you using?
So we're planting 14,500 per acre, and I've been sourcing from Cube Pack for the last few years.
Our spacing is a double row on our bed at 18 inches in between plants, except for Cabot. We do at 12-inch spacings since they don't run much. So I'd have to calculate that number. We've been using Indiana. I fill in some with Norris. We used to use Ketty a long time ago, but we used to use Crone until Indiana bought them. So that's who we're using now.
Question about if either of you have much experience with everbearing in high tunnels, what varieties you like?
I don't have a lot of experience. We did the field low tunnels a few years ago. Well, it sounds like David also experimented, but and Albion, Seascape were out there, and it was great to have the berries in the stand late summer and in the fall, but we were so busy with the fall pumpkin season, the agritainment, and all the storage crops that it was just so hard to keep on the tunnel maintenance, going up and down with the sides every day and picking them, that it fell off of our plan.
I know there's some other berry growers on here too. If other people have, I don't know, Charlie, what day neutral you're growing, if there's other favorites.
Yeah, so we tried high tunnel day neutrals quite a few years ago when we first bought our Haygrove system. The biggest thing is you can't really move the tunnel, so you can get 1 or 2 seasons, over, let's say, a 4-year period. You probably get 1 or 2 crops out of it, but then you just can't rotate. And the yields, because you're only doing 5 rows in such of kind of a big space, where if that was out, if it was outside, it'd probably be more like 8 rows, but because it's inside a tunnel, it's only about 5 rows. So, and you can't go more, your plant spacing can't be condensed, because then you're going to run into a bunch of disease issues. Even with it being undercover, you're still going to run into some disease issues. So if trying to go to an 8-inch spacing, a 3-row 8-inch spacing, trying to get your yields up a little bit, you're going to run into other problems. We are strictly outside for our everbears. We're doing about 25,000 of Albion right now, and I am trying a couple new varieties this year. Albion just has the best flavor, but it doesn't yield as high as some of the other ones, so that's sort of why we choose it. It's a little finicky with our weather, but we're here at 400 feet in the valley, so we get fog in the fall, which really helps us out extend our season for our everbear production.
Yeah, we don't
Thanks,
really
Sean.
have much experience, but I mean, I remember a long time putting in-ground berries in a tunnel, and the biggest issue was the humidity and really the soft skin of the fruit. Um, I just don't, it's interesting to hear you say that, Charlie, because you look at greenhouse systems and it's all tiered, or these stacked pots, and I've played around with pot culture, and I could see that being much more potential for a greenhouse production as opposed to
Yes,
shady ground.
we were I was in Spain actually a year ago, and that's what a lot of the Spanish strawberry growers are all going in tunnels on tabletop systems, because you can get 3 times the plants per acre. So normally you could get like 10 to 12,000 plants per acre in the dirt, but in a tabletop system, you now can get almost 30,000 plants per acre. So that's the big draw for it.
Yeah, and I've just always been looking at, how can I use my bedding plant houses without taking benches out? And so
And
that's
it's
why I
like,
started playing with, growing them in baskets, and then hanging baskets, and then on the benches as well.
it definitely is where the industry is moving. Most of the Ontario growers now are all leaning in heavily into tabletop systems. I know Norse Farms is looking into it a lot. A lot of the vendors at the North American Strawberry Growers this year were all hydroponic and tabletop system vendors. It's just because with methyl bromide no longer available, and chloropicnyl not as strong as methyl bromide, people are really looking for other avenues, and that's probably where the future of strawberries. I mean, not us. I mean, I wouldn't want to venture into that because of the overhead that it takes before you even get your plant in the ground. You've already built the greenhouse and a whole very complex system of watering is the biggest thing, because the water itself has to be clean and the right pH and so many different variables that it's definitely too tricky, and maybe as a side project, but nothing that I would really want to invest in fully yet.
Yeah.
So a strawberry world where nobody bends over is
It's ideal.
Kevin Verne is asking, I don't think you mentioned what your varieties are.
Oh, right. Yep. So my variety selection is somewhat limited with plug availability. We're relying most heavily on Jewel. About probably close to 70% of what I plant is Jewel. But we're also using Ruby June, Chandler, All Star, and some Early Glow. I do like Early Glow to kick off the season. It's very reliable right there at the end of May, beginning of June for us. And those first berries are sweet. They are excellent, good quality and sweet. The size is terrible on the subsequent picks, and it's always disappointing to see. But usually we're steering pick your owners in there, and my crew isn't going back to pick the smaller ones.
Thanks. David, I think you did talk a little bit about your sprayer, but Michael's asking for any recommendations on a new sprayer.
Recommendations for new sprayer? I mean, I think what Kevin's gotten with the drops is the way to go if you have a large acreage. If you're not doing a large acreage, I hate to say, I mean, I use a gun more than I want to admit, but when you just get penetration. So if because I'm using a regular boom sprayer for a lot of my brassicas, and so I don't have a separate boom with drops. I did build one once, and it was all right, but I think what he has is probably the way to go. And I know Charlie, I don't know if Charlie, if you guys use the electric static, I mean, that would be the way to go, I think, would be electric static sprayer on strawberries, so you can get underneath the leaves.
Yeah, we're doing I use 2 sprayers. I use an air assist, which is it has 2 nozzles per bed. It will do 5 beds, and that really will just it doesn't use a lot of gallons per acre. It's only about 30 gallons per acre, but that will take the leaves and pretty much flip them right over and cook everything that you need. And then when I'm needing to put on my Captan or my other protectant, I'll use the Hardy, the boom sprayer and that's at like 60 to 70 gallons per acre. Yeah. The combination of the two has been worked really well, because I can use the Hardy when I really need to drench the field, but when we're pretty clean and I just need a touch up, I can come in with the air assist, and that works pretty well.
And so the Hardy's a regular boom sprayer. It's not a air. It's not a.
We do have the old boom sprayer, and I might get that out this year. But we have it's a Gearmore. It's from Simma, Italian company, and it has it's air assist, so it has these like 4-inch air hoses that come off the blower from the sprayer, and then it has the liquid tube that goes right to the nozzle, and then the air hits the liquid, and it just plasters it. That's where I can designate just to put it over the plants on more of our expensive sprays, and then that's when I need to cover or do a large broadcast, I'll use the Hardy.
Awesome. Any other questions? People can pipe up.
Just how everybody's feeling about winter injury this year. I know we've had snow covered since about the end of February, end of January into February. But we did have some, cold temperatures with bare ground here down at 400 feet. So I just wonder how everybody else is feeling about, if they're going to have a lot of winter injury this year, or I think they're pretty protected.
I'm feeling pretty good. We did get a little bit, kind of snow, then no snow, but we didn't get the 20 or 30 belows like we used to. So, but we did hit like 7 or 8 below with small amount of snow. But I don't know. We'll see.
We're fortunate we never got below 3 here this year, so we should be okay. And also I think it was a very dry fall for us, and so the beds were able to dry out. I think that maybe the crown has, it's not sitting in saturated soil and not so saturated in the crown, maybe less likely to be freezing and bursting cells.
I do, this is just anecdotal, but the way planting a cover crop in our walkways, I think, is helping, because it's just the whole road is a lot more tucked in. A lot of times you'll mulch on the top and it's kind of thin, but now I've got 8-10 inches tall oats that just kind of, it feels like it's better protected on the on the edges of the road.
And then you're tilling those in, right, David? Like they kind of mush down and die, and then
No, they just mush down and die, and I just rake the straw.
Okay.
So I've got more straw in my row, but I've often thought it'd be interesting to do it with a Sudex earlier and get it taller, so you get a lot of wind protection. And I might play with that, but by going to the wider rows, and with this little Gandhi cedar and little Kubota, BX type thing, it's worked pretty well.
You ever worry about competition from the cover crop in between?
No, not really. Well, at least not with oats. I think maybe if I did do Sudex, I would be a little concerned. But the nice thing about the oats is we can plant it late enough. And so we kind of raked everything that we need to in. We got our matted rows pretty well set. So
when is that planting date usually for you?
It's usually early September. I would think down your way you could probably do it at the end of September.
They'll get the coverage, yeah.
Yeah, I would be cautious about the Sudex, because I've seen it. I mean, it does kind of more tillering and it's a little more aggressive. So I guess we've got just a few minutes left, but Joey's asking more about hoop houses. If they think, if you think this is a good use for a hoop house, growing strawberries in them. I'm assuming this is back to the day neutral question. Doesn't sound like either of you have really tried that, but
yes, I mean it would work. I mean, Albion Everbears do not like water, so that would be definitely a huge plus for Albion not having been rained on. You wouldn't have ruined fruit. It's just the cost of, that's where I've seen if you live somewhere where you're able to get a longer season out of your low tunnels, then you could see spending the cost on the low tunnels. But with us such a short season, and that the Everbears here are really kind of touch and go, where it's, you may have your first year, you might get lucky and have a bumper crop of Everbears and think you got it figured out, and then the next year the crop could fail and you've just spent all that money on low tunnels and you have nothing to show for it. So it's a very hard, I would learn to grow them without low tunnels. And then once you understand how to grow them, then I would add the low tunnels.
Thanks for the advice, Charlie. And then Michael is just mentioning that he's been growing teff between plastic culture, which I've also been seeing a little bit more teff out there. It's quite lovely. So, and Annie, I knew you were going to talk about your amazing secret variety, Mara de Bois in tunnels. I can testify that those are the amazing berries that Annie grows on her farm. So, it's pretty special, their system. So maybe Joy, if you want to talk directly to Annie, she's got it pretty dialed in. But
What is the system?
I'll let Annie talk if she wants, but just really, they seem to time the fertility and planting date really beautifully on this variety and have a nice market for it. So
the system is very small. So I think we're going quite differently than the other presenters, but it's been a really special product for our farm because the berries are coming in. We're getting like a decent yield in the fall and then a very substantial yield in the spring, and they're coming in quite a bit earlier than local berries in our area. But we are just selling them exclusively retail. Because it's not a high yielding variety, but the flavor's amazing. But I haven't ordered our plants yet this year, and Norse is sold out, so I am scrambling due to my delay.
well, also to mention that you guys are like in quite a cold, uniquely cold location. So I think your success with growing strawberries in that way is pretty great. So
Yeah, but so far so good. I feel like our customers every year we're like, should we try something like a berry that's more durable that would yield higher? I don't think our customers would forgive us if we switched away from Marchant de Bois for those early berries.
well, I'm gonna wrap up. Thanks, Annie, for jumping on. Surprise talk, but thank you, Kevin and David, so much for sharing your amazing knowledge. We're gonna post the recording and see you all next week. Thanks again.
Talking with you guys. Thank you.